there is a sound delay. So I'm going to teach normally. And then if you guys have a question, I'm going to be about 30 seconds behind the actual sound. So not a big deal. We'll carry on. So let me do a quick screen share. Let's see. Okay. Okay. You guys should be able to see my screen. Hi, Ian. Good to see you, man, or see you in the room. All right. So this training is about, authorization boundaries. Last time I kind of realized, hey, I need to break down step one further because I got a bunch of emails, different explanations. So that's kind of the scope of this training. But we will go ahead and talk about where we are in the process, right? So a little bit about myself. Founded a company called Mafazo. My background, everything that I learned about security is from DoD. I got out, started doing commercial work, and that's what I'm doing. I still help out Department of Defense contractors. I think it's a lot of fun, so I do that. And I'm passionate about this field and about software assurance. The other thing is I'm going off of one screen. So jot down my number. It's 937-789-4216. If something happens, I have my slides up. If something happens, you can just text me and I'll stop and adjust just because I don't have a full studio setup or anything. So, but that's a little bit about me. My company, we are an independent cybersecurity team, basically a very small company, but we love what we do. We got software development expertise, and we like to read regulations and then write software. And the reason why I'm doing RMF is because there's so much pain for commercial entities, even for government. And I'm doing a product launch in 2016 to kind of automate the whole thing for everyone. At least that's my goal. And one of the things that we're very proud of is we're part of the Dell's Founders 50 Club. Check it out. They only select a few companies, and somehow I got blessed to be one of the few companies. So, so I got to read this fine print, and basically everything I'm teaching you, none of this is legal advice. So, regulations change, standards change, or I should say, standards change more so than regulations. And depending on your industry, healthcare, FEDRAMP, cloud computing, Department of Defense, even though the standard is a standard applied all the way across holistically, you have to consult your legal counsel. So I have to put this up there just so everybody knows that you got to get your chief legal counsel involved, especially for policy writing in the commercial side. Alrighty. So there's a previous lesson that I did, and it was on step one. It's posted out on YouTube for free, and this will be posted as well. And what we kind of covered, there will be some overlap, but not a lot. We covered high-level process, who uses it, different entities, and I compared it briefly to other regulations. Or NIST to other regulations, how it is, one is more prescriptive than the other. And then we talked about categorization. So it was way too much to cover in 1 hour. So I'm breaking this lesson down. This should be about 40 minutes. And it should be good because it's a very good part of step one. It's a very important part of step one. So here's some additional information because I always get emails. Hey, can you make this available? This, that, and the other. You can use any of this stuff for free. You can use it for your internal training. You can give me credit if you feel like it. If you don't, that's okay too. And if you want to request additional training, you can email me. I prefer it being an open forum like LinkedIn so people can weigh in what they want and what they don't want. And My teaching philosophy is, I want to talk about theory, but I want to really talk about what happens in real life. So we'll go from theory to practical applications. And then because there is no true standardized approach to apply this, not for every industry, every environment, I focus heavily on concepts. I try to help you understand the why, and versus people requesting templates, all of that. You can fill those out, but if you don't understand the why, when you go from one environment to the next, you might be at loss. So, and again, just text me if something happens. I'm just working off of one screen, so I can either look at my screen or the chat box. So, and I'm switching back and forth. So here's the survey results. Did a survey just to kind of find out, who's struggling with what, and who's the audience, and what can I be of help with during this training. I was expecting more commercial than DoD, but so what I did is last night I stayed up, I adjusted the training to kind of make it fit this audience. So my hope is that you get something out of it, and then if you learn something new. And also the challenge here that is this on this survey is FEDRAMP is very different than how Air Force does their CNA or how Army does their CNA. And then it's completely different at the state level and the commercial level. It's wild, right? So again, it's good that we're going to focus on the why, the concepts. So when you get to one of these environments, hopefully you can decompose that why down to how do I actually do this. And most people here have not worked through a CNA package, which tells me a lot of people are from FedRAMP because that's fairly new. And some are working. So I hope to be of help to you as you go through this long, lengthy, laborious process. And we got people from everywhere, DoD, state, healthcare, commercial. So just kind of all over the spectrum. All right. So here's the content. We're going to go over just the process overview. Okay, I got a text still showing the first slide. Okay, let's see. Entire screen. I have moved the slides. Okay, good. Somebody texted me. All right. Okay. Whoever texted me, text me back if you see my slide because I got to switch back and forth. Or the slide that I'm on now should say lesson content, or you can start typing it. How about now? Sorry, guys. This is a technical glitch. I'm just texting the person who texted me just to ask. Okay, now you see. Okay, it's good now. All right. So I'm going to skip over these slides because there's no point in me repeating. This was a company slide. This was a fine print. This was previous lessons. Here's the YouTube link if you want to capture it. But if you just type in NIST RMF, Max Aulick, YouTube, something like that in Google, it'll come up. So that's that. General information. So I think this is where we were. Everything is going to be available for free. Again, I'm just displaying this slide because technical error. And survey results. You probably want to see this. So most of the people here are probably struggling with FedRAMP because it's fairly new. Some are DoD. Some have reached out to me and are saying that, hey, we're starting a brand new, start initial capabilities development to, not a doing of the CNA package. So, okay. All right. So we're on lesson content. So I hope my voice and my slides are in sync, because if it's not, I'm in trouble and I really can't do anything about it. But I'm going through all the slides and I know you can see them. So when I put the video out there, I'll try to sync them. I'll separate the video from the audio and I'll try to sync them. So process overview, just to kind of baseline where we're at, from step one to and why is this important and impacts all the rest of the steps. Definition, what is authorization boundary? How do you establish it? And then I'm going to give you some tips on scoping, some real world tips on people that some people, how they mistakenly make it too large or too small. I'll show you some visual artifacts on how people have done this previously and some of the things that you might want to consider. So where are we? So this is the first step, right? And I would say that we're actually still doing our pre-flight checks when we're talking about scoping the system. You see, it doesn't really say, it just says categorize, right? Some people will say, well, this authorization boundary process falls underneath the categorization. I actually think it falls before that, when your program management office or your business unit says, hey, we want to go after FEDRAMP, or hey, we want to develop initial capabilities document, whatever it is, right? So it kind of falls way before that to figure out what is the scope, what is the entirety of this RMF process. So, and then the other thing is, you're going to have a hard time describing the data type inside of your boundary if it has not been defined. So it'd be difficult for you to categorize it. So this is, again, a pre-flight kind of check. You're going to do this as part of step one, but most people just kind of skip over it and just get to, defining the data types. And then they have all these questions about data types. And again, they're still searching for scoping. So here are some synonyms. And the reason why I put these, because for those who are in the DoD, have done this before, they are familiar with these terms. But others who are just getting introduced to NIST, and you work in a healthcare environment or you work in a commercial environment, here's the alternative names, right? So PCI, card holder data environment. This could be part of your NIST accreditation. I don't know. It just, or your FEDRAMP accreditation. It just depends on the data type, right? And if you're sharing environments, it could have HIPAA, PCI, PHI, Sarbanes-Oxley, all kinds of information. So whenever people talk about this, they really all mean the same thing. That's the point of this slide. And I want to make you aware of that, because a lot of people will come and say, hey, I'm looking to develop an IT systems boundary. And what is the difference between authorization boundary? Or can I get a CNA for something else? And, how does that reflect my IT systems boundary? So let's talk about the definition. So there's a suitcase in the middle of the screen. When I first moved here to India, I was about 13 years old. I really struggled with the English language. And, I practiced, I got better, and I'm still learning. But in college, my professor used to say, Max, there are some words in English that are called suitcase words. And what suitcase words are is that you can really throw anything inside of them, whatever you want. So sometimes you have to really dig through the conversation, or ask the stupid questions on, well, what do you exactly mean by that, right? And many times we don't want to ask those questions, but that's really what an information systems boundary is. Because to us, information security personnel, we're only looking at the information technology side of things. However, when you talk to the business unit, they're going to think about personnel, equipment, and funding. And anytime there's funding involved, there's going to be, they might group them in a way that it doesn't make sense or it does make sense. It's clearly defined in the DoD sometimes. However, when we get to the system level, there's different APIs talking to each other. And data center level, it gets even more confusing. Do I certify my whole data center? How about people? What if one person has to have clearance and he's a network guy and he's on my RMF environment? Can I use that same person for other environment that doesn't require clearance, or vice versa, right? So the boundary it includes people, equipment, funds, and information technology. And sometimes we just focus on the information technology. And then it adds another layer of complexity under same direct management control. That could be the CEO, VP, director, right? So again, suitcase words, you really have to get out, talk to the business to figure out what is the real delineation here, between different systems. All righty. Okay, my battery was dying. Okay, there we go. So when do you actually establish a boundary, right? If you look at the specification, it tells you to establish the boundary, basically at the initiation. But the reality is that the system, everything has already been initiated. Then you got invited to the party late. And then they're telling you, hey, you got to do this certification accreditation thing. So now you got to go back, right? But it doesn't really work like that, right? So everything happens at the same time. Upper level management is defining budgets for FEDRAMP if they see an RFP, or for program management office. They're developing their ICDs, or initial capabilities development, program protection. And the program management, the business side, rarely talks to the technical side, right? And it's even worse in information security. So, while your business is saying, here's the people that are going to be part of the boundary, here's the locations, buildings, budgets, funds, systems come afterwards. And sometimes that's a challenge. So my encouragement to you is get involved with the business, try to understand the intent of why they're doing this. And then you can help them make decisions, as far as where and how to slice the boundary, what might be more beneficial than other ways. So again, this is a little bit of realistic advice, which is, it says at the initial, but it all happens at the same time. If you look on the RMF, it tells you different team members that are involved, everybody from the executive down to the IO, and they don't talk to each other, right? So a lot of times this might be given to you. If you're a FedRAMP person, you got to get in there and help them define which data center, which people are part of this, and then how are you allocating the budget for all the activities, right? You got to make that business case, and it's really hard to do because most of the time the business doesn't understand this is a new undertaking. And then in DoD, it's even more difficult. So, that's kind of when to establish and when it really happens. So when I talk to, if you're under regulation, you kind of just do what you're told, right? Just you don't have any say. But NIST has some good concepts, right? It's very prescriptive. The commercial world can definitely use it. But the concept of boundary tends to fall apart when we're talking about all of these things, right? It kind of reminds us of, okay, we got this castle wall. We're going to protect it. We're going to hug our data and go to sleep and be okay, right? So commercial guys always ask me, man, why do you even need a boundary? Can't we just do regular old cybersecurity, right? And there is some truth to that, and there's some, and you really need a boundary, right? And then it's just a balancing act, right? But I got some good reasons on why you need it. So here are some reasons. So if you understand everything about your scope up front, like you understand it thoroughly, when you get to control compliance, it's going to be so much easier. You will know right off the bat which ones are non-applicable. If they're talking about something like acquisition, and you know that you guys are, that's out of scope, it's been outsourced or given to another entity, those controls become a lot more easier to answer. And then it's just the artifact gathering exercise. You don't want to start gathering artifacts, reading and learning. That's what happens to a lot of people, and they spend a long time just putting things together, and at the end it doesn't work out. So I spend a lot of time just understanding much as possible before starting on step one or answering the controls. Again, realistically, it all happens at the same time, but I just sit there and talk to people. That's just my habit, because I become much more efficient that way. And the other reason is, in this environment of a borderless network, and you got to deliver fast, most of your developers, network engineers, and all the other functions will be separated from information security. So, even though your boundary may not be documented, you want to go talk to the developers, because they'll be tying in one system to the next, so on and so forth. And there's definitely scope expansion problems. So, if you signed, your name to a control or to a package, you want to make sure that everybody understands that. And then, it's not that they ask you permission, it's just that they add these things to the boundary, if it makes sense, right? And again, the other reason is most of the systems today are undocumented, because development and everything else is happening faster than really we can document. So again, get to know people, walk around, talk to people, talk to developers, talk to program management office, to really understand your boundary, because you're going to have to document it, but you want to understand things that NIST does not call for, which I'll cover in another slide. And my thing is, if you don't understand what your scope is, you're going to fail to deliver. And I've seen this happen. People will sign up for a CNA package, and then all of a sudden they'll keep adding, components. They'll keep adding IT systems, budgets, and it starts looking like a huge data center. And, it's so vague, right? You could get away with that before, but NIST is so prescriptive, you just stretch out the timeline, or you're writing so many different artifacts. So I spend a lot of time in just understanding, and these are good reasons. So the number one reason out of all is this, and I've seen this, and many of you probably have seen this. You have your ATO, you have your approval, right? And then somebody finds out, because it's going to take you a year to get it sometimes, right? Most of the times it takes about a year-long cycle after you go through all the reviews. And now that you have it, people want to add stuff to your scope. It's just human nature, because it's cheaper. So it's a very, it could be a very small module. It could be very, like a new piece of hardware. It's just running a service. I've seen this happen, and even in PCI, even in different kinds of environments that have been certified. So again, just from a liability information security professional standpoint, if you signed your name to a boundary, to a system, you want to make sure you document that. And then people want to add all sorts of systems underneath it, and then they say, hey, let's just get a waiver, let's get a minor release, and it totally messes up your package. Realistically, none of those controls that apply to your system apply to them, because they're just want to add it. So that's the number one reason. It's a point of frustration. I know those who have gone through this have felt the pressure from upper management, and even from developers, on just adding adding things to your ATO. So let's talk about what are large versus small boundaries. Got gonna spend a lot of time on this because we have FEDRAMP, which is a data center, cloud computing. We got state level stuff, which could be anything. And then we got DoD, which are very specific budgeted systems, right? Those could be small environments. So two very different opposing types of systems. So I want to cover this area. So if you think about it, if you don't even read the slides, just think about if you got to certify something that's huge, like a data center, it's going to be so much complexity. Now, the business wants to do this because they think, well, our internal cost goes down. I only need one IA person. Let's just throw it all inside of this one boundary. Until you get audited, now the assessor external cost goes up. Whether it's your SCA or whoever coming on site, your 3PAO, right? And he or she can go anywhere, right? Because you've defined the scope to be huge. So the business thinks they're really getting away with this. Well, I got this one huge boundary, and once I get my ATO, I can have anything inside of there. But they don't understand the cost later on, which is your assessor is going to give you a really hard time because he or she is putting their name on, examining everything. So the larger the boundary, the more from the assessment side, the more sampling you have to gather because you cannot do 100%. It's just nearly impossible. And if the environment is too small, right? Let's just say it's a very small piece of software that just rides on any server, any environment. It's just a small piece of software. And it's too much justification for non-applicability. And what that means is no matter how you slice and dice it, at the end of the day, you got to do high, medium, and low controls. And it's still in the range of 100 to 200 controls. So if you just got a small piece of software, you got to justify why 90% of the controls are not applicable, right? So, you got to find a good balance. And that's kind of what the specification calls out. So everything in italics is actually quoted from the NIST website. So boundaries that are big make information systems difficult to manage because they're very complex, right? And what I tell the business or anybody else is that today you might save some money, but your external cost is going to go up, right? And you might be taking on unreasonable amounts of liability. Your SSP is not going to look right because it's very vague, and you're going to be putting in parameters, organizational parameters, to say you're going to monitor things, and now you got to monitor this entire large environment, right? So business wants to do this to save on money, and they want to comply and forget about it, but you just have to have a conversation and help them understand that they're just delaying their cost, right? So, and then some security professionals, they want to have everything tightly controlled. So they end up with several boundaries. I've seen that in the commercial environment where you want to control every server, or you want to control every software, and too many boundaries require too many packages, right? So think about, just from a timing perspective, one ATO, even if the paperwork was same all the way across, it still takes you a year because a human still has to read it. So here, your obvious is internal costs will go up. So sometimes, security professionals, I'm guilty of this. We just do this because we want internal costs to go up so we can get some help, right? But it's not the reason to divide up and just have lots of boundaries. So that's conceptually the difference between two. And you got to find the right balance between those two and what makes sense for the business. So it's kind of the art and science. Here's what NIST will not tell you because it's hard to. So you got to go talk to the business, ask them how much time do we have to get this certification? What's the plan after we get the certification? After we get FedRAMP, do we plan on getting work from government right away, or is this a year or two long process, right? What kind of talent do we have to support this? And then, what kind of money, what's the budget? So you can ask for the budget. They may not tell you what it is, but you should definitely ask for the budget if there is any. And most security people, we have this IT background, so we feel like we cannot talk to the business, but I just do it. Even if it doesn't sound right, I ask them, hey, do you have any budget, or is this just going to be me working this? Because if it is, I'm going to be constrained, and that's going to impact the type of boundary we can get, right? The other thing is, if you can find somebody that gets you the intent of the certification. In the DoD environment, it's just, I just want my ATO. I don't want to get disconnected, right? But on the commercial side or FEDRAMP, it could be, well, once we get this FEDRAMP thing, we can go get more business from the government. We can respond to RFPs, and you can work with that, right? So if just talk to them, say, hey, this small boundary will cost, 100,000, and I'm making up numbers, but if you want this huge boundary, it's going to cost $2 million. Can we, and it takes a year to get it, and it takes a year to win a contract. Can we, get something small now and then expand later, given that you're going to set aside a budget for more compliance and security work, right? And if they're honest with you, and if they're honest with themselves, that will be acceptable. And usually the problem is that security people fail to address these concerns to the business because we don't have understanding of how to do it. So that's where the art and science comes in. And NIST actually encourages this. It says if you don't have the money, if there's a cost constraint, time constraint, you can adjust your boundary up front, and that's kind of what it is. The other things I look for to develop what's called a common controls catalog, to inherit and share responsibilities, I look for, does the organization have a common security organization, somebody who handles all compliance, somebody who handles all cybersecurity concerns, like your operations center or something, right? And all of these things help you define a good balanced boundary. Because if you have a good centralized unit, they're going to inherit, or they're going to provide you lots of the controls, right? In theory. So again, that impacts how you want to establish your boundary, how you want to communicate to the business on establishing a boundary. DoD does a fairly good job of this, and it's not perfect, but that's the concept, right? If a central security organization takes care of all of the things like continuous monitoring through a SIM, right? Security Operations Center. I don't need to have that. I don't need to answer that question. It doesn't need to be part of my boundary yet. Or if it is, it's part of a different boundary and I just inherit from that, right? So these are the conversations you got to get into, and you got to start to understand how your organization functions from a business standpoint. So let's get to the elements of a boundary. I just want to do a quick check. Can everybody still hear me? I'm okay. Just type it in the chat because I keep switching, and I'll check back. So, and I'm going to continue because there's a delay. So elements of a boundary. So there is no set standard. So at the bottom, you see it says unapproved template. I found that from a .edu site because I thought it was pretty good in capturing the information. Again, I don't push templates. I try to push understanding of the content and the material because depending on your environment, if you're doing FedRAMP, there are very specific standardized templates that you have to follow. If you're in the federal environment, depending on who your approval authorities are, who your SCA is, they give you the templates that they want you to follow. So if I give you something, right, and you take it to your organization, you complete it, and then you provide it to the SCA and the authorities, I'm going to lead you astray because you're going to have to redo all of this work because the templates that they're used to seeing doesn't match what you're providing. So somebody just texted me, thank you very much for letting me know. So so we got to focus on what are the key elements that are needed. So I've seen things like purpose and mission of the organization, basically describing why, and then tying that why to the system description. How does this system achieve that objective or that mission, right? I've seen this in a lengthy document, right? System description, purpose, mission, it's all written out. And then the application name itself, right? It could be a software, it could be an entire system. Again, these are lots of suitcase words, but you can define them by just asking questions. Well, what does the application mean? Is that just a software application, or does it include hardware, right? You have to ask these questions, leave nothing to assumptions. The business unit name, what the DoD does is align everything to federal enterprise architecture. So in the commercial side, you might have to align everything to, perhaps a practice for the government. That's what AWS does, right? There's a government segregated environment if you want to host FISMA information, right? So you want to add that information in, right? Your RMF team, again, this is in the DoD environment. It's already given to you because you already should know who your DAA is and who everybody else is. But on the commercial, loosely defined, and FEDRAMP environment, perhaps your 3PAO or the Joint Accreditation Board, they're part of your team, the entire team, not physically located with you, but all of the 6 steps, who does the approval. And the POCs really just depend on the environment, but the concept is the same. The titles are the same. So you go to the NIST specification, you look at the entire RMF team makeup, everything from risk executive function, DAA, SCA, and senior authorization official. Just stick to those titles and ask, hey, who's going to do the approval? Who is this person, or who is this agency, right? And you can list those out inside of your boundary documentation. Location, this could be geographically dispersed locations like in Texas to Florida, or it could be simple as test, dev, and prod environments. And you have to be careful here because I've seen many people just certify the test or the prod environment, but then they want to do some other stuff in test and dev, and that's fine. However, just make sure that when they're shifting things from test and dev, there's some sort of configuration management. Things are changing entirely in the DoD. Sometimes they're encompassing all 3 of these environments. Sometimes they're not. So again, whatever it is, you want to define it and put it inside of this 1-page or 2-page document. Hardware, software. If you have an approved list, you can put those things in there. Really hard to do. The bigger the organization, how are you going to define hardware for your data center? That's just ridiculous, right? So again, it's a balancing act. Only once you understand all of this, right, you can then ask the question, okay, what kind of data flows through in and out of this organization, or in and out of this conceptual boundary that I have in my mind? And now you'll have to talk to different functionals, like, is there PHI? Is there any healthcare? Is there any kind of, financial data, right? Or I forgot the NIST publication, but it lists out all types of information, right? So that's why, again, I go back to, you can't categorize without knowing all of this information, because every time you attempt to categorize, you'll ask the question, what kind of information? Here's the checklist. And then you'll be like, well, this flows through here, or that flows through there. And then the question again will be, is this part of the boundary or is this not, right? So I like to do all of this legwork up front before I get to the categorization. And again, unapproved templates, they're all over the place. Email me. If you tell me what agency you're working for, I can give you a general idea on how to do this. I don't mind helping out at all, but again, my fear is that I may lead you astray because everybody wants something different. So The visuals, right? So once you got this lengthy document, you always have to describe the boundary in some sort of a visual, like an artifact. So I, use the KISS method. I'll keep it very, very simple. And the main thing is you got to remember who your audience is. This is going to go up to your SCA might understand, and because he or she is doing control compliance just from an audit perspective, then they have to pass it to upper level management, right? With just an executive package of some sort. You got your reports, you got your risk, you got you got your the scope, the boundary. And the reality is most of the DAAs, I don't know any DAA personally that have ever done control compliance. A lot of them in the DoD side are generals that have been that has delegated authority, right? So I always remember my audience, and I it's almost like drawing a cartoon. It's really not a real architecture diagram, because if you make it too complex, it's going to get kicked back, right? So I remember when I first started, I made the foolish mistake of, oh, well, I got to get everything in there because this is not right. This is not accurate. And, I just have to add everything. But then what I realized is when I'm sending it up, the person that I'm sending it to, they understand, right? The auditor understands, the assessor understands. But then they got to pass it to their leadership, and their leadership does not understand. So if you want to get through the process fast, you got to make the job of the auditor easy, right? Because they know that, all right, if you're doing the right thing, you're going to be able to explain everything in your control compliance, in your actual statements, in your artifacts. But when it comes to visually, you gotta keep it very simple. So I'll show you some examples, but in general, use a red line or a green line as a demarcation. Use simple images. You can find them on the net all over what a firewall looks like, server. And then if you don't have any hardware, just start using different shapes for defining how the flow of your software works, right? And then you add context, right? Like, how does the user get to the internet, or where is the internet relative to your diagram? I've seen that everywhere, right? They'll draw a little cloud and then they'll draw the internet so they get it. Okay, there's all these things in place for to prevent direct access to the internet. Again, going back to, it's a cartoon for a different audience, right? And then you definitely want to show your different ports, your interconnections, and make sure everything matches, because you will get cross-checked. I've seen people say, hey, you listed an SMTP port, but you didn't list that on your ports and protocol sheet. So this is an abstracted diagram. Make sure, even though it doesn't have that level of detail, make sure it is somewhat accurate. Don't list protocols on your drawing that you don't have in your PPS, is the most common example I've seen. The other is interconnections. There might be other systems that you need to show, just to make it a point that yes, these have the same mission, but this is out of scope, right? So an example might be, you might have procurement systems, or two federal or FEDRAMP data centers, or two different types of, let's say, in a healthcare institution, and an Epic system and a Meditech system, and same mission. They provide PHI, but they're disconnected. They're not part of this boundary. So you just have to show these other systems how they talk to each other. Again, there are approved templates, there's unapproved templates, and I've seen DISA make changes on a sheet every so many months on what else they would like to see. So but that's the main thing. Keep it very simple. So I extracted this out of the FedRAMP website, and as you can see, FedRAMP has to do with data centers, right? And so it's is my sound gone, or am I still good? Let's see. Let me text this person back. Sound good. I'm gonna take a pause because I want to make sure the sound is working. So usually I'll have somebody in here that, works with me, and they'll give me like a heartbeat every 5-10 minutes, like, hey, everything's good, everything's good, so I don't have to switch back and forth. Okay, sound is good. All right. So back to system boundary. This is for FEDRAMP, right? And FEDRAMP is cloud computing environment. And that could be a data center, right? And that could include any type of system, any type of hardware. And you can see how simple this is, right? Just very simple. And you just put things in context for somebody very high level, somebody who's never done security compliance. You're trying to communicate to them that, hey, you have the right protection in place, and there's the internet, here's the outside stuff, here's the inside stuff. So everything we're talking about is in this green line. So so that's kind of the high level pictorial, an example of it. Here's another one for larger environment. So this is a little bit complex. Again, I found this on the internet, but no matter where you go, they kind of start to look the same. Demarcation line, a legend, as well as showing some sort of cloud to show how the data flow is. And the elements that you have to add to this all depends on the entity. They'll tell you exactly what to add. Sometimes they'll say, hey, add your port, add your IP addresses, or leave off your IP addresses. We just want the ports and the buildings and the location. So again, it all depends on the audience, but this is another example for a fairly large environment. So I want to cover FedRAMP, because FedRAMP is really confusing to a lot of people, and it's actually confusing to me when I work in it as well. So before we start on how do you set an authorization boundary, we just want to look at the cloud computing model, right? So on the left, you have on-premise, the full technology stack. To the right, you got software as a service. I found this, by the way, on YouTube, or not YouTube, on Google. So where it says others manage and you manage, those are blurry lines. That's just what somebody believes right here. But in this or another data center environment, AWS, it could be totally different, right? So what I like to do is have a concept called, horizontal slicing and vertical slicing, right? To kind of get the basics down, right? The other thing to remember is that security doesn't change, only the responsibility changes, right? Security concepts as applied to networking, storage, server, virtualization, and up the stack does not change, only the responsibility. So who's going to be doing what, but they're supposed to be doing the same thing, and that's one of the control items, right? And so as the responsibility shifts, the controls shift. That's where inheritance and service level agreements come into play, but they're supposed to be doing the same thing as you are. So I like to look at and examine the whole stack. Doesn't matter where I am, but this is very important for FedRAMP, because there's a lot of, obviously confusion. Oh, well, we have a software as a service or a platform as a service. Okay, well, what about below that stack? Who certifies that, right? So you gotta remember that information. So there's a concept called horizontal slice. You won't find this in the books. I just kind of came up with it because it's easy for me to explain. So if something like an enclave. So if you ever worked in a regulated federal environment, they have something called an enclave. An enclave is everything like your network routers, firewalls, just your basic networking. Anytime you plug something into a router, it's out of scope. And sometimes they might bring it into scope, but generally your central communication department will, or the base department will take care of the enclave, right? So that's horizontally slicing. And then they will have any kind of purpose-built operating system for network control, for and people, buildings, processes are all associated with managing this enclave. And so there are servers part of this too, but they are used to manage the enclave, right? So that's horizontal slicing. And then I look at vertical slicing. So this is where you would develop an app and you want to, get it FedRAMP approved or RMF approved. Well, this is where your app rides on top of another infrastructure, right? So so this is application and data. So if we go 2 slides back, this is on top of somebody else's infrastructure or whatever word we want to use, platform, right? So you got to understand where the demarcation is for your accreditation. Are you just certifying certifying the entire infrastructure? So when the government comes your way, they can bring their own platform and software, or are you certifying the entire platform and then they can come in and install their software? You have to have those conversations, understand them. If you can't even document them, still having that understanding, just asking the basic question of, hey, so if I host my data inside a DISA or a FedRAMP data center, who does the physical security? Who changes out the servers, right? Just asking those questions are going to give you, an idea of who's in charge of the servers, right? And then from there, you extend the conversation to, okay, so you're in charge of the servers and I'm in charge of my software. Can you give me a security service level agreement according to these NIST controls that I have to answer, right? About physical security or procurement of those servers. So horizontal and vertical slicing to kind of, get my head straight, like around the federal cloud computing. The other thing I learned is that horizontal does not mean the stack is in order, right? And that's confusing because let's just say your physical server are located in another data center, but you are in charge of purchasing them. So that's where the funding issue comes in. Well, your program offices purchases these mainframes, right? So from a technology standpoint, the stack is in order, but from a compliance standpoint, it may not be, right? So you just have to keep that in mind, because as you go through the controls, and again, this will be like, oh, I should have scoped it out in my boundary. I always ask these simple questions, where's my server located? Who's in charge of it? Who's paying for it? And that conceptually starts to give me an idea of what am I in charge of? What can I put in my package? What can I not put? And then the things that I cannot put, those are either inherited controls or you have some sort of service level agreement for remainder of the stack components. So that's what that is. We are almost done. Let's see. Yep. So here's what we covered. We kind of went through where we are in the process. We talked about some definitions, right? The suitcase word. We talked about how do you establish a boundary where you can document it. We conceptually talked about how to scope large environments, external costs versus internal costs for small environments. And then I kind of focused on data centers, and I kind of gave you a concept of horizontal versus vertical slicing. Very important, especially if you're dealing with DISA, right? And then we talked about artifacts, keeping things very simple visually for your audience. No matter how much documentation you might have behind it, when you submit, you have to keep it very simple. Try to add elements only that are asked for or approved, and try to get that up front. Ask them for a template. Say, hey, can you give me your last artifact for this? Because I'm trying to submit, a package to you. So I want to see what that looks like, right? Because or else there'll be a lot of back and forth. So that's the summary. Resources and templates. There's a lot of people here for FedRAMP. Go to fedramp.gov. And for DoD, I think Thomas Marshall, he's on. So he can provide you some of the resources. He's had send those to me. There is an RMF knowledge service. Jennifer, yes, everything will be available online. I'll send you the link. If you are part of the government and you have access, you have a common access card, there's good resources behind the PKI, but it's the same information, and you can get pointed if you talk to whoever your approval authority is, right? So, and if you're in the commercial state and healthcare, you are completely lost. There's no central authority, nothing to help you. And that's kind of why I'm here. So email me, call me. I can connect you to a lot of people who are doing this heck a lot smarter than me. So, and if you're doing FEDRAMP, call your 3PAO. And if they charge you a boatload of money, call me. I can help you just through the basics. And I hope this was helpful. Again, this is my contact information. Really active on LinkedIn.